Anyways, welcome everyone to another casual stroll through the Lord of the Rings online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I am a senior world designer on Lord of the Rings Online. I've been doing this for, coming up on 20 years now. And today we're doing a very special tour of a place that's near and dear to my heart, a space that I have probably rebuilt 4 times now over the history of my working on Middle-earth, between Middle-earth Online, Lord of the Rings Online, and a variety of other projects. We're going to take a stroll through the Trollshaws. The Trollshaws has been a region that has long been a close contender to win in our polls on the message boards, and it finally won. We're coming down to the line, coming down to the end of our Eriador regions, so it was about time that Trollshaws won. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with this stream, we are going to be just walking through a region in Lord of the Rings Online, talking a little bit about its background, what went into developing it, and just kind of doing a tour through the space. This is not a stream to talk about anything related to things like game systems, PvMP, anything like that. This is purely a world design focused stream. Happy to answer any questions in relation to that, but otherwise, let's try to keep it focused. I know there's a lot of excitement with Gundabad coming up. We've done Brawler previews and the new Legendary Item System previews recently. I'm not going to be able to answer any of those questions for you because they're not in my area of expertise. There may be some little bits of overlap here and there that I can talk about, but we'll hit those as we go along. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me. As has been noted in the chat, if you haven't seen me drink in a while, please remind me to do so. That way my voice doesn't die over the course of this hour. But with that in mind, let's get this started. So as I said, we are in the Trollshaws. Right now I'm standing on the last bridge, the bridge crossing the river connecting Lone Lands to the west and Trollshaws to the east. This area, I think, when we were building it, we wanted to really try to get across the autumn forest kind of space here, and with these trees and all of their bright oranges and reds and yellows, I think we did that fairly successfully. And I think honestly this is one of the first kind of successful forests that we've ever had in Lord of the Rings, and kind of use that as our base to sort of iterate on and on. I'd say one of the challenges with this region is definitely the number of little ravines and dead-end pockets here and there that can make exploring Middle-earth and a little bit challenging, especially if you don't know where you're going. For reference, we are all the way over here, and we're going to just spend our time, kind of running around the region, checking things out, and eventually ending probably in Rivendell. First question is from Iwanar asking about the island there. Why is that island just north of the last bridge so steep and inaccessible? It would be a fun place to explore. Honestly, I don't have a good answer for that. There may be, let's see. Yeah, I don't have a good reason for that. No real specific reason why it couldn't be explorable at some point in the future. Also, Leonard notes that the nonlinear design of the region is good, by the way. And I think, there are some times when anyone is designing a level, you can kind of go either wide open and let players go anywhere, or you can go pretty narrow and linear. And I think this region is kind of a mix of that, where it is fairly wide open. It does kind of have a loop going around it as you cross around South Trollshaws to North Trollshaws, Nantornath, and those areas. It kind of loops around. The tricky thing is making sure that you don't end up in a dead-end pass. which I will probably do a couple of times rolling around in here. The Trollshaws is also one of the areas that has the distinction of being kind of one of the first regions in the game where we expanded on it after the launch of the game. You know, we did a little bit of that in Breland, which was fairly well received from an explorer's perspective. But for Trollshaws, the expansions that we did to it were very heavily story focused and were very, very deeply involved in the lore and the story that we were telling through the epic book. And I think some of our most memorable characters, particularly one of our most memorable villains, has some very, very strong hooks in the Trollshaws. So just checking in on the chat again. Tim Bolton says he loves coming here when the leaves turn orange and red and in real life. So it kind of like matches the real world around you, which is a cool thing to see. We're not quite there yet. Oh, my window's blocked up, but we're not quite there yet here in southern New England, though. You know, it is getting a little bit cooler and things will start changing color soon. So Iwanar says, yes, the game seems to reuse many map structures. The loops in the south is almost identical to the loop in the Misty Mountains and Trollshaws, and those are full of trolls. Both have an accessible center rise. So some of that is because of the development practices that we kind of felt we needed to have in place in terms of server and load balancing when we originally created the game. Originally, when we created the game, there were a lot of these kinds of like central, inaccessible spaces. The Shire, Breland, North Downs had some of them too, where we felt that we could only have so much playable space, and we had to break it up a little bit more in order to keep the game servers happy. So there were a lot of just kind of weird, random impassables, and I think the Trollshaws in general is probably one of the areas that got segmented up with impassability most because of some of those concerns, because of wanting to make sure that the servers were happy with the performance, in part because we were trying to do a little bit more heavy stuff here in this region than elsewhere. Let's see. Mage Centron says, I've noticed when brand new players try the gimmick of walking to Mordor, they die somewhere around Bruinen. Was this intended as a nod to the lore of the Bruinen being protective barrier, or is it just because... There is a gameplay system in place that kind of is intended to discourage players who are considerably lower level for an area from being in there. And I think probably, the Bruinen Gorge area is that point that the players eventually hit where they are just too low level to be in the space, and the game decides to get a little aggressive at them. It will make all of the enemies in the area just very hyper vigilant and hyper aware to those low level characters, and the likelihood of those low level characters surviving reduces considerably unless there are other characters there to support them. It certainly does kind of hinder some of the open exploration of the landscape, but it was felt necessary to kind of put that system in place in order to avoid certain types of exploitive behavior. So Tim Bolton mentions some key locations here that appear in The Hobbit involve a certain grove with new rocky formations, but also a cave with closed door not accessible, which may be the Troll Hidden Cache. Are there any nods are there any other nods that we might have missed? I mean, I certainly think that the stone trolls are the like major hook, at least in this western half of the region. Um, I don't know that we have anything else specific as a nod to the Hobbit in this area. Um, Eventually, it's funny, just like in talking about this a little bit. Oh, spiders dropped down. Um, when I was doing my research for just like locations that I can easily get to, that I can like put in, teleportation commands to get to, it's funny looking at how married the Trollshaws was to Misty Mountains. And in fact, a lot of the location names for things in the Misty Mountains um, use the Trollshaws as their names. And I even found an old unused dungeon shell, which we'll go take a look at, that very clearly looks like it was intended to be some sort of goblin town. Um, or at least a beginnings of Goblin Town. So even though it's not technically in the Trollshaws, it's that like that Hobbit nod, that Hobbit hook in the area. Um, so Loamfind says, I guess this is the zone with the largest amount of ruins. I feel like there are other regions that have a greater density of ruins. Evendim, for example, I would say is pretty heavy on the ruins. Gondor is mostly ruins, just based off of the stories that were being told in there. The ruins that are here kind of encompass and represent the fallen kingdoms of men that were originally here and had declined as the might of Aragorn's people also declined. Ivanar says, it is scary trying to walk up the path on the other side of the Bruin and when you're low level. Yeah, there's certainly a little bit of anxiety, both in terms of the higher level content that's up there and just the sheer verticality of it. I think that's one of the first times in the game that players come across such a steep hill, steep mountain, basically, for them to climb up. And so when you start going up and you're just kind of like heads down looking at the ground, and then you turn the camera around and it's almost like kind of shocking how much the visibility of the world seems to open up when you get up that high. So I believe in here this is a glade used by some of our quest content, but in the public versions right now it's just empty. I believe there was a wood troll boss that exists in here as part of the epic story. Oh, I'm being asked to drink water, so I'm going to drink water. Yes, apologies to anyone that thought they were coming to the Shire. I had to make the joke and just see if I could get anyone riled up about it. Just because, the Trollshaws went for so long before it actually got the recognition that everyone wanted it to have. So Procello says, how do you approach the building of forests change? How did your approaches to building forests change over time? Really interesting to me to look at the Old Forest versus Trollshaws versus Gravenwood versus Aaron Lasgillen in terms of design and content. So I think our approach changes largely in the size of the trees that we use. The Trollshaws, the Shire. I'm thinking specifically the Binbull Wood and aspects of Green Hill Country tend to use a lot of smaller trees, which means we have to use more trees in order to build a canopy. Once we start, you look at something like the Old Forest, which is kind of, unique in comparison because the Old Forest doesn't really have The Old Forest is more like a dungeon than it is a forest, as far as in terms of building it. We built the paths for it. We were using very specific assets as walls to get around in it. So it's very much more of a dungeon space. So I'm not sure I would necessarily call it a forest, at least from the perspective of how we think about building it. So we get through, region one, area door, building forests out of these like skinnier, smaller trees, potentially, fairly heavy in terms of both graphics and visuals, very kind of cluttered spaces. Then we look at something like Fangorn, where we kind of went in the different direction and used larger trees, bigger trunks, larger canopies, but having more open space and visible space underneath the canopy. Mirkwood is a little bit more of a old school, or like the Trollshaws style forest, and I'm probably backtracking right now. So, I think our approach changes here and there based off of the needs of the forest and what kind of feeling we want the forest to have. I think there are portions of Dunland that have very similar forests to the Trollshaws, but it's a much more recent forest in comparison. So it's really just how the look and feel of the space needs to be for the area. Next question. The textures in the Old Forest seem to be the most detailed of any forest in the game. And again, I think that's a byproduct of us treating the Old Forest more like it was a dungeon, with defined rules, defined paths, defined barriers, and that allows us to more specifically build things. Whereas, on landscape, we are not hand placing every single tree that you see. We're using configuration files that we can use to set rules of how frequent certain trees appear, how frequent certain bushes appear, what sizes what their scales are, what their rotations are. So we're doing it as a more of a programmatic approach that is attempting to simulate a realistic space, versus something like the Old Forest, where it's a very strictly specifically built space. Tim Bolton says, with this area being your baby, did you leave your signature on a tree or anything like we mentioned one of the devs in Ered Luin? I have not. That's not something I actually think I've ever really done in anything that I've built. I've never really... There's one recent Easter egg that I built that we'll get to at some point down the road when we get there. But at the end of the day, it's more of a joke than any sort of nod to myself or anyone else. So Mage Centron asks, was there a story behind the different designs of trolls in different parts of the Trollshaws? In this area, there seems to be two distinct types, a more cinematic and a more fairy tale, for lack of better description. So yes, there is a specific reason for that, because we felt that the trolls discussed in The Hobbit were kind of a different sort than the trolls discussed in Lord of the Rings. And we wanted to make sure that we were able to represent both types of those trolls. Like, the trolls that are in The Hobbit had a lot of character to them. They were kind of these goofy, talky, jokey, like, they were more like your goofy fairy tale menace, more so than these, like, big, hulking, beasts of war that exist in Lord of the Rings. And so that discrepancy we kind of felt we had to address a little bit in this way. We've used the the Hobbit style trolls in a couple of other spots as well in Eriador. Um, but basically, for the trolls that are intended to be the servants of Sauron, we go with the like big stone troll variant. Um, so next question. Oh, and to go back to Tim Bolton's comment, being that this region was my baby, I would less call it my baby and more like at this point it's kind of this like grudging like, oh, I got to do this again kind of thing. Luckily we haven't decided to completely redo the Trollshaws from scratch again, which I'm thankful for. And the joke always around the office whenever anything comes up about the Trollshaws, whenever something about doing a revamp on any small portion of it comes up, the joke is always like, oh, Matt will want to do that. I really don't. But but yeah, like this is certainly a very well worn region. It's gotten a lot of attention over the years as far as what's going on in it, and and who's worked on it. So I'm not the sole person who has worked on it, but it has been worked on by a number of people over the years. Woo. So Captain Kieran asks, how did you decide where to place the ruins in the Trollshaws? So I don't think we really had much of a rhyme or reason to how they were placed, and I think that's more just kind of how our approach was, back in the day. I think we would likely be a bit more thoughtful about where we place them and would try to have some sort of supporting structure around it all if we were to do it again. Roads, some sort of infrastructure. You gonna get there? Yes. That sort of thing to make it feel more like it was a intentionally lived in and civilized space. We just didn't really do that too much for here. In large part, I think because the lore for the region as far as Cardalon and Arnor goes is that this area is largely kind of just abandoned and it's wild. So here are our friends, the Stone Troll Trio, and their cave is, where was it? It was somewhere around here, the cave entrance. Watch as I can't find it now. Alright. Well, I can't find it. Go me. I think it may have been here at one point. Did we maybe accidentally clean it up? I'll have to look into that, because that seems odd. I thought it was there. So I am going to add that as a note for myself to look into, is where is the entrance? Did we accidentally remove it as part of our cleanup for the legendary servers of this region? I hope we didn't, but if we did, we'll get it back there. Oh, toast to the trolls. So one of the things that I talked a little bit about when we were walking around in the Lone Lands, and it's something that I think we tried to be somewhat aware of as we were building regions that had trolls in it, was the conceit and the concept that they didn't like sunlight, and so the stone trolls, the Hobbit style stone trolls that you do see walking around, are typically under the shade of trees or on generators that have them appear only at nighttime. And I think the Kurolog, the Sauron trolls, we kind of, through story, as part of the story, just kind of mention them as being of hardier stock and being able to resist the sun a little bit more, um, just so that we wouldn't force players to participate in content only in certain times of days. Like, we've done that a little bit here and there, and it's kind of like a neat, fun, sort of like party trick kind of thing. But we don't do it all that often because it can be frustrating from a player perspective to be like, all right, I'm going to go do this quest, but now I have to wait like 3 hours for it to be nighttime in order for me to do this quest, and we don't want to have players waiting in order to finish the content that they're wanting to play. Um, Lomefind asks, did you invent the wood trolls specifically for the Trollshaws? I think they were invented. They were created as part of the Trollshaws and then have been used, fairly extensively elsewhere. Kind of meaning them to be sort of our evil ent analog, effectively. Trying to hit that mark on that like kind of story beat. Um, Now I remember this area used to be a group area, and it's since gotten a little bit more friendly. But this was originally meant to be a group play area, but because the epic story threaded through it pretty heavily, the area was softened a little bit so that it could be done, solo in a pinch if need be. So yeah, these trolls, like, we kind of hand wave a little bit. They're in the forest, they're under the trees, blah blah blah. They're not going to turn to stone. We're all good. They're hardier. So that's a little bit of a concession that we make in order to have gameplay. Let's see. So Michael asks, how do you do the placement of quest hubs? How did the placement of quest hubs influence the shaping of the world, or is it the other way around? I think it kind of happens all at once. We know a general area that something like the Trollshaws is going to fill. We know the space it's going to fill, and then usually from there we figure out what the expected player path through that would be. Where would they be entering from? Where would they be leaving from? And then from there, we try to dot our quest hubs in places that make sense as good stopping points. That's why at the last bridge, there's a couple of NPCs hanging out there to kind of start you on your journey. And as you progress further in, there's a couple of smaller quest hubs. You eventually get to Thorinhad, which is kind of the first major hub with services in the area. There are other quest hubs, and then of course there's Rivendell at the very end. So for a lot of regions, we tend to try to do that. We try to make sure that kind of maybe every quarter to third of a region has some sort of quest hub to support it, and those numbers may vary depending on the shape of the region, where those hubs are placed. Like if one hub can be kind of centralized and feed into a whole bunch of other areas, we can do that. And usually our mapping process is all paper mapping at the start, which allows us to nail down those kinds of things, like where we want the roads, where we want the bodies of water, where we want the quest hubs to be sitting around those major features. I think as the game got older, we paid more attention to setting up things like the placement of hubs around natural features, as opposed to saying, oh, we want our hub here, and then having it go like that. So I think there's been some growth as far as how we think about where our quest hubs go. And yes, that area was many elites and a very dangerous place. Thank you for the drink reminder. So I guess we're kind of at the crossroads now. We're coming up on the Bruinen. We can continue our adventure through the Trollshaws and kind of the chronological progression, or we can, continue the the lower lands of the Trollshaws and then go up the hill. So, first person to post, that's where we're going. Are we going up to the High Moor, or are we going down to the Bruinen Gorges? And while we think about that, lower lands first. All right. So before I continue on with that, Mage Centron asks, was there any attempt to make the landscape somewhat easy to get lost in, like how it's described as a hidden valley of Rivendell and how Boromir got lost on his way to find the meeting? I think there was some of that. We always need to tailor to some degree frustration that would be associated with getting lost in the landscape. Like, I think that's something that took us like multiple iterations on the Old Forest to really kind of like feel like we hit right, because the Old Forest was very, very confusing, and players were getting kind of frustrated in it in early beta. So with the Trollshaws, I think like it being more of a loop kind of helps some of that confusion. You can look at the map and you can kind of see, here's your main loop here. You've got another loop sort of down here. High Moor is a bit more wide open. So it's, I think, more about trying to impart the feeling of being lost in the wilderness than the actual physical reality of being lost in the wilderness, because it can be frustrating to, go down a path you think is the right path for 10 minutes, fighting your way through the enemies that are there only to find out that it's a dead end. It feels like that we want to try to like better indicate, where those kinds of experiences will occur. All right. So for the Bruinen Gorges, this area is our first like actual addition to the Trollshaws with a pretty considerable amount of content associated with it. We've done some of this before with Breland, but that attempt was more focused on open explorable space, whereas here we are treating it more as a like dense content rich space. We wanted to play around with verticality with the gorges and whatnot as well, but also not make it a space that players felt like they were going to be frustrated in. I think there are some challenges that came up across the players' plates as they were exploring the area, mostly in visiting Delisad and other difficult to get to areas as part of the epic story. And here we are in Tal Bruinen. It's been a while since I've been in here, and I was like, just in my own mind, like thinking that all of this stuff was a bit further north than it actually was. And it's just kind of one of those, like, I think I have in my head where the quest hub is, but really kind of forgot where it was in relation to everything else. Let's see, get up to a good vantage point, and then I'll take a look at a couple more questions. One of the things too that we wanted to do here in Talbrunnen is play with the day file a little bit more and kind of make it feel a little bit more airy and magical when you're in this space. Just to kind of show the difference in, transitioning from one area to another. This was a fun little quest hub to build, and I think it was one of the first times that we had done this kind of like over-under fake interior space before. I think a lot of our ruins were very strictly like, here's a flat and some stuff on top of it, and we had never really done anything like this. And part of why we had never really done anything like this was at the time, landscape shadowing really didn't function quite as well as it does now. Like in here, you having the dynamic shadows provided by DirectX, this area is able to feel like a little bit more suitably darker than it had originally been. Sometimes we'll address these kinds of issues by having volumes placed to, manually change what the day file is going to be. All right, so let's take a look at a couple other questions. And also, yes, as a reminder, I'm not answering any questions regarding Brawler, legendary items, game systems, PvMP, performance, like those kinds of things. That this is purely a world-focused, world and landscape and level design focused stream. Tim Bolton asks, was there any National Geographic viewings for areas like there was with other regions? So we really, honestly, didn't really start that until Moria, and we really don't do a ton of it unless the place that we're going is just so bizarre that we felt like there needed to be, basically a virtual field trip to those areas. Something like seeing it in motion would be more impactful than just doing research through Google and various landscape websites. Let's see. What was the decision to make the sky? Why was the decision made to make the sky atmosphere completely different in Delosad? So we'll get there, so people can see what you're talking about. But for Delosad, it's intended to be a cave, and whenever you cross into a cave, there's always that kind of atmospheric change. You have lower levels of light, so you can't see as much of what's going on. Places where there are light, the light comes across as a little bit more intense. So we wanted to have that kind of appearance and experience in Delosad. Now you look at high definition lighting models in more modern games, and they just do that kind of thing natively and naturally. If there are assets that are blocking the native lights of the scene, they will do moderate changes to bloom and light intensity and shadow intensity when you're in those spaces. And unfortunately, our engine doesn't have that kind of thing yet, because it's an old engine. So we do the things we can to kind of fake it. There are a lot of little tricks that we've done to try to make what we're producing feel more modern, without necessarily having the whole system in place to modernize it. Is the effect completely successful? I think it works. This effect, it happens a little bit too quickly. If it was really what would be reflective of the real world, the exterior here would not have changed. It would just be our lighting levels inside. But we work with the tools that we have to produce this kind of feel that we were looking for. And we were able to do some of that there with the sky, though I think there may be clouds or fog that are preventing it from really blooming out the way that this sort of thing would in real life. So continue down through here. It's day, but the stone trolls are out patrolling. The server apparently has some broken timing somewhere. Potentially. This right now I am running on a private server, so all sorts of fun stuff can happen in those environments. LSI says, I really love how Delisad came across. It really has an intense feel that fits the nature haunting location. Yeah, this was a lot of fun to build, but also tricky to build because we were trying to build it with a somewhat limited set of assets. Avoiding asking for like a heavy amount of new assets to build the space. So let's see. We'll tour down here a little bit, and then we'll make our way up towards the High Moor. So one of the things that is on my plate to do eventually is, kind of go through and revise the travel systems in a number of regions. The Shire is going to be, the first one up for me to do that. And the hope would be to kind of modernize it, make sure that, places that feel like they have a need for having travel destinations actually have it. And then further refine it, make sure the ones that, feel like they need swift travel actually have it. I think the Shire has a lot of opportunity to to test that out and to bring it to more modern standards of what we do for travel. So the Lost Temple was something that was built during my time when I was not working for Turbine or SSG, so I can't really speak too heavily to the content and lore that goes in there, aside from it being a recently rediscovered palace, effectively, that the Gaunt Lords have decided to, make theirs. So I don't have a ton that I can really say in relation to it. But I do have to say, when I first kind of rediscovered it on my own while I was kind of reacclimating and familiarizing myself with the stuff that had been built during the time that I wasn't working on the projects, I think it's like a gorgeous location, and I wish there was more that I could explore with in there than the instance really allows you to. So and we'll check out the Lost Temple shortly, once we get ourselves up to Rivendell. We're gonna make our way up the High Moor. Here, Goat is going too slow. I'm gonna go fast admin mode. So was there a forest or area IRL that was considered the goal for the look of the Trollshaws? I don't think we had any specific look or feel that we were looking, any specific location we were looking to recreate outside of the high concept of autumnal deciduous forest. I think that was our, that was our main striving goal to hit. And while there may have been source images that we used for inspiration, I don't think there was any one location specifically that we used. So Iwanar says, it's funny how devs think every terrain type has to be included in every region, so they put tiny little swamp along the Brunnen. Well, I mean, realistically, bodies of water like that do have some degree of foliage and plant life running all along them. And, that sort of thing, maybe certain bodies of water have it to a greater or lesser degree. If this was if that river ended up being more of a rocky, craggy, steep space, then, that's the reeds and whatnot may not have been as viable for that. But I think because it was a little bit slower, a little bit flatter, it felt like it made sense. Um, one of the things that I've done in areas like the Vales of Anduin as trying to set up our scene file usage in a way that is like natural and responsive to kind of the things that we build. So, for example, in the Vales of Anduin, I set up our scene files so that if a scene file was painted close to the edge of a water type, whether that's a river or a pond or something, the system would know, oh, hey, there's water here. I'm going to put water-based plants along here. There's going to be, lily pads, or there's going to be reeds, that kind of thing. So it's a little bit more smart and feels a little bit more kind of natural in how things go. And if we were to ever like redesign the Trollshaws, I would probably do something similar. Yes, the Bruinen is flowing through a rocky region, but I think having a little bit of that here and there doesn't mean that it's inappropriate for the space. Any chance of custom waypoints added to the map from Dead XR? It's something that we've talked about and would be something that we would need to get on our engineers' plates. Like so many things, like we've got legendary items that are being worked on. We've got the brawler that's being worked on. Those are big tasks that need to get handled first before we start looking at other kinds of improvements. Certainly UI improvements is something that we are interested in and want to do. As to when those improvements happen, that is something that is, up in the air and TBD at the moment. Do you ever read any books about the real life locations that inspired Tolkien in his writing of Middle Earth, especially places he knew of or visited? Thinking John Garth's World of J.R.R. Tolkien. Got a lot more that could be recommended. So when we do our region personality work, there is a lot of research that goes into kind of comparing and contrasting what was written versus what real world locations were inspired by what was written, and whether or not those are something that we can translate into gameplay. A lot of times there's a lot of research that goes into like, oh, well, this, these kinds of trees and flowers and bushes and whatnot are things that would exist in the fictionalized version of the real world that Tolkien created in this area, and because of that we try to like have those plants represented there. Here we are. We've made it to Rivendell. I skipped the Giant Valley because we're limited time and we have some dungeons to get through as well, and other interiors. But the fun bit of trivia for Rivendell is it's an area that was built using a piece of technology called World Machine, which allows you to take a bunch of inputs and create a realistic looking landscape in a third-party software and then export that height map. So we were able to use this to get the like really nice like erosions that you see in the mountain, in the height maps, and get some of these more natural forms. I think we've gotten fairly decent at building things that look like natural forms by hand, but there is something really appealing about kind of allowing some software to apply the science for us, so that we're not just kind of having to guess at like, this rock might have this amount of sediment carry and that sort of thing. Will you ever connect Trollshaws with the Ettenmoors via an actual road? So the Ettenmoors is likely to stay its own kind of little encapsulated thing, in large part because we have to be and want to be very careful about monster players finding ways to get into the into the playable world, because the playable world is not a world that is built around PvP. It's not a space that we necessarily want open conflict in, outside of very controlled, constrained experiences, and there is the risk that actually having a connecting road could open those doors. Like, certainly we would need to, at minimum, have some sort of teleport into the space, to really make sure it was safe and ironclad. So that's kind of the biggest reason why I doubt that there will be a road to the Ettenmoors from Trollshaws or any other region. Not to say that might not change in the future, but for right now, that's kind of where we're landing on with regards to the Ettenmoors. Oh, another call to drink. Are there any places in or around Rivendell that most players don't know about? I mean, I think at this point, places like Rivendell are so well trodden that while there may be like little nooks and crannies that are interesting but don't get a lot of visitation by players, I wouldn't say there's anything that's really kind of like hidden that they don't know about. Particularly when you look at the map, like, I don't know that players really go up here to what we've affectionately dubbed internally as Compromise Alley, mostly because they're just more convenient places to find those services. But I think those things are more likely the things that players wouldn't necessarily know about or be too inclined, because there's not really much in terms of content that sends a player up there. So we'll go up here. So as the background, the reason why we call this Compromise Alley is because of kind of the lore stating that there wasn't really much for commerce going on in Rivendell. Vendors and that sort of thing. But from the game perspective, we needed a way to represent some of these services so that players that were here in the area would have access to them, which is why we have these NPCs, vendors here, why we have the auction house support that we have here, the bank support that we have here, because it was a compromise. It's the compromise of, like, we live in a game world. We're making a game. We need to be able to support certain aspects of the game, even if it's not 100% lore accurate. Why is there no farmland in Rivendell? Well, from a placement perspective, it is fairly hilly terrain, which would make flat farmland a little difficult to pull off. But I don't have a good answer for that. Certainly something that I think we could consider adding if there was an interest or need for it. So let's continue down through here. So how much thought was put into where famous characters are placed around Rivendell? Galdor at the stables, Glorfindel by the waterfall. That's a question that is largely handled by our content folks. When it comes to those major NPCs, there are a few that, like, we very specifically know. Like, we kind of figured, Elrond will be in his library. I don't know that we specifically knew that Glorfindel would be hanging out here. But I think, in general, they're usually placed where the content designers kind of like feel like is a good place for them. Certainly Glorfindel was placed for the awesome view. At least I like to think of him as being placed here for the awesome view. There may be another reason that a designer had for placing him there, but as far as like most NPCs go, I don't think there's really unless there's like a specific like reason in the lore for a character to be somewhere. I think it's really just up to the designer and where they want to place it and where they're feeling is like a good place for it. Um, so Jurgen, I would like to know how many years of content will, or how many years of content will there be, or if we can give you a hint. Well, so I know Reninian has mentioned this briefly, but earlier this year when he joined the team and just trying to like start planning out what the future updates, the future stories for the game is going to be, um, is he asked us as a team to come up with multiple years worth of pitches, and I think he was not expecting us to give him 16 to 20 years worth of ideas. This isn't to say that we're going to do all those ideas, but if you were to like line them up end to end, like, and we were to do them all, like, that's like where we're looking at right now. um, as has been noted by Cordovan, like, we would love to keep developing the game as long as they'll allow us to keep developing the game. Um, so I think this is more a statement of like, we've got a lot of ideas about where we can take the game from the narrative perspective, and we're not intending to really slow down on that front. Um, Yao asks, did the idea of having Rivendell housing area ever get discussed internally? And yes, or maybe not specifically Rivendell, but at least a elf housing that is kind of representative of the Rivendell in Ladris Valley experience. I think one of the things that we really want to do with all of our housing neighborhoods is kind of sell the fantasy that you're living in a certain area. Like the Shire, the original housing neighborhoods were all kind of built around like, here, live in this like quintessential representation of the race that it was built around. Rohan was like intended to be the representations of like quintessential areas in Rohan, and the housing stuff that we're working on now is again intended to be a quintessential representation. What our next housing areas be, can't tell you. It's not ready to be told yet, but it's something that like we're always kind of aware of, and I think Rivendell housing is, or at least elf housing that is patterned after the Rivendell look and feel and experience is something that we have talked about and would be keen to do whenever that opportunity arises. Hold on 1 second. Sorry about that. So I am back. I had to take a quick step out because I was hearing noises, and I need to go check on those noises once we're done here. But there are a lot of dungeons that we didn't get to because we're running low on time. But the one thing to go to is the Lost Temple. I think this is the right. Yes. This is just a gorgeous space, and the designer who built it like really did themselves proud with it. And I wish I could explore more up here. That would just be, I would be super happy. I remember running the instance and being a little sad that I didn't get to explore as much as I wanted to. But this is a very beautiful space, and I am really loving the look of it. All right, so I think that just about does it. We're at 3 o'clock, so that's my stopping time. So I'll go through and hit the last couple of questions, and then we'll wrap up. So let's see. Nice note. LOTRO will still be here when we've developed a warp drive and have colonized the galaxy. Hopefully, we're excited about continuing to build it. Someday they need to do Lothorian premium housing, vertical neighborhoods. That would be very popular. That is another space that we have thought about for housing. Soft Snake says that he would prefer them not to be in the middle of existing landscape like the Rohan ones are. I think I have ideas on how to make something like that coexist better in a space for future neighborhoods. So it's something that we still want to play with. It may not be something as to the same scope as and scale as Rohan neighborhoods, but it is something that I think can help sell the idea of living in the world if you are able to be a part of the world. When you said the hex, Druid's Fire says when you said the next housing would not be men, did that include Bjornings? That did not specifically include Bjornings, but Bjorning housing will also not be what we do next. And let's see, do I have a pet? I do not currently have a pet. I have a toddler, and she eats up a lot of time. So, and in a good way, and maybe next time we could do just a Lost Spaces in the game, Casual Stroll Through Limbo. That's a possibility as well. So, anyways, thank you everyone for joining me this afternoon and for taking a trip through the Trollshaws. I really enjoyed kind of going through this space, kind of reminiscing a little bit and answering your questions. So, yeah, that'll do it for today. Thank you, everyone. I hope you're enjoying LOTRO. Hope you're getting in and getting ready for Gundabad, for the Brawler, and for new legendary items. This is all exciting stuff that's coming up. So hopefully next time around, we'll maybe have some newer, fresher stuff to preview, even though we still do have a few more regions left. Anyways, thank you, everyone, and have a great, great afternoon and a great rest of your week. Have a good one.